Live from Western North Dakota. The men and women in blue are coming right back at you. We're straight off the cuff here with episode 26. Good afternoon, Mr. Hannell.
There we are. Yeah, we're doing an afternoon session today.
Yeah. It's been a while. Typically, we get a little sleepier in the afternoon, so we try to do them earlier. But
especially old age for me, sundowners, it starts creeping in. So maybe sometimes better in the morning, but afternoon would be fine too.
Well, we were on probably about a month ago or so, give or take, and we had chatted a little bit, and we wanted to really get back on track, hitting one of these a month, kind of doing some updates. We even have some fresh things that maybe we kick out, maybe early 26, kind of kick out some new ideas, possibly try to do something maybe where we feed the public to give us some things, maybe to
I know
do
you're going
kind
with
of
that.
like a guest list podcast where we just answer questions from the public, maybe see any almost open it up to like beyond coffee with a cop. Maybe this one is just what's on your mind, and now let us answer it.
Kind of a virtual type of session. I kind of thought of it here a year or two ago, and it just kind of percolated on the back burner for a while. But having like I want to call it off the cuff live, or like a ride along live or something like that. We'd be soliciting some questions and different topics that the citizens would want to hear us to talk about. We'd maybe intermingle that with some war stories and some other stuff. I know that's always some the feedback we get from citizens, as that's what they like hearing us chat about. So we'll try to cram the room in with 4 or 5 of us in here, we'll see what we can put together here, and again, having it more of like a live session. So definitely no pressure whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly right. No more editing tools needed on that. No, I like the idea. I think it's good. I think about last week just doing the quarterly report in front of the commission. I think a lot of what the public sees from our commission reports, sometimes they want a little bit more meat on the bone when it comes to kind of like some of the higher profile stuff. So I think, kind of marrying that idea that you had, I think could be really nice. Be a nice way to kind of mix this podcast into almost like a news source of sorts. Yeah,
in a sense, because traditional media and newspapers kind of limited to a single issue, the newscast, 30-second sound bites. So having this media capability here with podcasting and YouTube and our social media reach, being able to do more of a long form format on that and going into a little bit more details is, like you mentioned, some maybe the trends that we're seeing or some of the bigger cases that we're seeing, being able to maybe get into a little bit further detail that we couldn't typically do.
Yeah, and you talk about some of the trends that we're in, and it feels like we could probably play the same sound bite that we played 5-6 times this year in these things, but you think again, we had Officer Mauser on last time, and he talked a lot. We really kind of went deep into why are we really aggressive when it comes to drunk driving and intoxicated driving, impaired driving. Did a really good job laying it out as like why we do that. And what do we have here to talk about right out of the gates when you talk about high profile situations?
Another DUI crash.
In the city we had a scary one where individual highly impaired ends up crashing through somebody's garage and then hitting the lower bedroom wall. Right. Thank God the child wasn't in the room at the time.
They were home, but not in
the room. Yeah, right. Thank goodness. And then the other piece, our friends in the county, 2 times now. Similar circumstances where you're talking about impaired driving with no seatbelts.
Yep.
It doesn't take a genius to know that the survivability of rollovers, especially if you're impaired, like it is a bad combination. Bad combination to be having. So here we all are again talking about the same issues. We here have been preaching it. We've been talking about it. Our last podcast, we kind of highlighted it, but there just needs to be something. We need to find some kind of traction here, whether it be some kind of community partnerships or something that we need to maybe get this message out even a little bit broader than we are.
Certainly, and the best we can do right now at this point is just ask the public, those watching, making sure, if you're a parent of a kid, talk to them about the importance of not getting in a vehicle with somebody that's impaired or driving themselves when they're impaired. Call for that ride, and just being that voice of reason before they have to come to make that decision, because it's too late when you're starting to tumble end over end and realizing that was probably not a good idea. Shouldn't even be that position to begin with. So a lot of that, and just even for the adults in here, it's Uber, Lyft, all these rideshare companies out there. There's plenty of options and resources out there. You just shouldn't be drinking and driving.
Well, and the other piece that it's scary because when you think about the kind of the trend that we've been in this fall, and our fall weather has been fantastic, then you add on top of it, if you're out and you're having a few too many and it's cold, like it's about to start getting here,
right?
You're even maybe more apt to try to press your luck. So we just, again, we hit that piece, but we do have some good news. We did have some successes and some wins. We had a really nice retirement party. We had Cᴜғғ, one of our dispatchers.
Yep.
We talked about this on the lead up when we were kind of setting up the retirement party itself. 20 years, it's a long time.
20 years to do anything. Is definitely a long time, but especially in our line of work, whether police officer, dispatcher, firefighter, 20 years is a trek.
Yeah, it's when she goes back and she thinks about her career and all the different, it got talked about in the retirement, but all the different lives that she's been able to impact positively, and just all the difference that you make over the course of a career. So kudos to Kim, and we wish her the best. She's still kind of in the field.
Yep, just next door.
She's next door
at the sheriff's
department. Brothers in brown uniform. She stuck it out, and she, that's one thing about the law enforcement family is that kind of once you get into that first responder field and it becomes home, it really is that. Right. It's kind of a second home for you. So
that's going to be a good plug. We do have a position to fill now in dispatch, and in fact, we're going to be hiring for 3 now because the county and city commissions were both very gracious this year to allow us to expand our staffing, because we've been identifying the last couple of years that the current staffing level that we have just didn't allow for a lot of people on the bench, so to speak. So if we have people calling out sick and then somebody else was on training that week and somebody else took vacation, we're down to bare bones and we can't just not answer the phone. So a big thanks to the commissioners for supporting us on that. And we'll be starting interview process for those 3 positions here. I'm assuming next week we'll probably start putting, actually by the time this is hitting the air, I'm guessing that job listing will be posted. So if it's something that interests you, if you want to make, I always like saying, if you don't want to make, or if you want to make the difference, not just a difference, no better way to do it than being a public safety telecommunicator. So look out for that job listing.
One of the funner things I get to do is when I get to do these second interviews with these dispatch applicants, and you get to kind of hear and pick their brain as to, like, well, sometimes they don't even know, what this job or what the field looked like, but something was calling them. And then you get some applicants where they're like, man, I just, being able to tell first responders where to go or wanting to be on the line when somebody's in a frantic state and just want to be that calm voice.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of all over the board, similar to law enforcement. But, if you don't necessarily think, oh, I could do this job, I promise you there's been a lot of applicants that have come in. The qualities we look for is just having a really good sense of yourself and how to operate inside of yourself, being able to process things and then just execute those orders and just sharing information. And we've seen our training programs that get done inside the dispatch center. They can, we've said it too, we can basically train a monkey how to make a traffic stop.
Pretty much.
It can really take you to a whole different level when you jump into that training.
Exactly. And we got our dispatcher 2s, or like our second in commands, have been doing an excellent job making, updating our training protocols. And for the last year or so, they've been really heavily engaged with that. So as long as you have the core basics of being able to communicate and being able to, not so much multitask. That's kind of the U word now. Now it's more of switch tasking is the new concept that they're putting. As long as you kind of have those fundamentals, we'll teach you everything else. All the phones and the radios and stuff like that. It's pretty simple beyond that.
So that kind of blends us in. We had a nice event. First Responder Day happened, and it was a very cool little event that Mr. Muffley, the principal down at Heart River, kind of had this concept, and his staff executed it really well. We had an entire assembly, kindergarten through 5th grade, kind of threw a party. We had police officers, we had dispatchers, we had firefighters, we had some new paramedics from the fire department. Everybody kind of came in. The kids did call it like a little pep rally of sorts
that's a good way to put
for
it.
first responders, and it was excellent. It was great to have them kind of think of us in that way. Sometimes the National Police Week we get recognized in things, but this was a different one. This was a very cool experience. Yeah,
really well put together, and we appreciate the invite on that, and just being able to impart that partnership really early on in young kids' lives, that have them aspire to something too. That maybe some days they'll be the ones walking into a assembly like that and getting recognized for their work and their efforts.
Let's stay in the school. And yesterday, which will probably be last week when this thing airs, but yesterday, SRO Jarrett Blaine, who's been on the podcast, he kind of championed something. He had come to me one of the first days of school. I was actually out at the middle school, and he was kind of highlighting and showing me some of the complexities with traffic flow out at the middle school. And kudos to Jarrett. Jarrett is one of those guys where when he sees a problem, like he's not scared to sink his teeth into and to kind of try to find a way to help resolve this thing. So, I just kind of grabbed onto his project with him, and we just kind of started to work something. We ended up grabbing city engineer. We worked with school administrators, public works. We've got a new process, and we hope it's going to take some of the pressure off of both pickup and drop-off time out there. But if you haven't seen it, we'll give you a plug to our video that we did on it. We understand it's going to take a little bit of time. That building.
Growing pains.
Yeah, a little bit of growing pains, but and this isn't the entire process. We just didn't have the time to basically execute the whole thing. But as it goes on, I really do think that parents will kind of see the method behind the madness.
Sure. Yeah, and then just to summarize it, is basically just establishing a queue lane for east and westbound turning traffic. So it'd be when you're going north on 29th Avenue West, they're approaching 21st. Instead of just having the turn lane start 20 feet from the intersection, it's actually almost right where the bus loop starts. So all that's now a no parking and loading zone. It's strictly just lanes to occupy the queue for left and right traffic onto 21st.
And the whole concept of this is we're trying to take pressure off of the exit, which would be that 29th Avenue when you're exiting the parent loop, just so that we can fit more vehicles on 29th and kind of keep everybody. When they come to pick up, it's smoother. When you leave the school, it's going to be smoother instead of some of that bottlenecking that we've typically seen. But let's talk. Winter's coming up. Mikey always does. He always does some funny pieces when it comes to our parking ordinances and things like that. But I think it's just important. Some people may be new to the community. There's a lot of road construction projects out there and things. But what do you want to convey on your winter parking ordinances this year?
Sure, we're full swing here now into the trailer, boats, and camper ordinances. You have to be off the street now, November 1st to April, right? April. So making sure before the snow flies to get those stored away off the street, either on the private property or in the storage facility. But again, before the snow flies, it's just we preach again and again. The reason we do this is one, keep our neighborhoods cleaned up from extensively overparked campers, boats, trailers, and then vehicles as well. But it's just also when the snow does come, which it will, a lot of it, that our street department, when they do those initial passes, that one berm, for that first snowstorm starts, and then now that car doesn't get moved. Now the second snowstorm, that berm goes, and before you know it, you got a one-way roadway in town, especially some of the narrower streets in town. So that's the method behind the madness there, the reasoning behind it. So if you do have those parked on the streets, please get those moved.
And the only thing I'm going to highlight on that is it's just imperative to do this before that snow starts flying, because we've seen how many times have we had complaints now and then we're having to move them at the back end. Those snow berms basically turn into concrete, throughout the window, and then now all of a sudden you're talking about breaking things and trailers and stuff. So please do use the time now to get that stuff off the streets.
Exactly.
Into November, we got an event coming up. We did this last year, and it was a massive success. We kind of partnered here at the DPD and our association, partnered with Sodexo, which is who operates down at the cafeteria of DSU's student hall. We're doing the same thing again this year. We're pushing it out. I've already got, I think 2 days ago I pushed out, looking for volunteers. This becomes like a police department family type of an event. And that's exactly what it looks like again this year. I've got probably 20 volunteers already. We did monetary donations to Sodexo, and then we'll go down. 1,200 meals, I think, last year we packaged up.
So, and what you're talking about is the community Thanksgiving dinner.
Thank you. Yes. Yep. I got too far ahead of myself. The Thanksgiving community dinner. So we've been pushing that out, and we're going to continue to push that piece out. But it's just like I said, 1,200 meals, I think, between the to-go meals and the ones that got fed there. So great event for the city.
It's free meal. So if you're alone for the holidays, just money's just not there this year, come and join us. Yeah, we'll be at the DSU Student Center, starting serving, I believe, at 11:30 till about 1.
1:30. Yep. Yeah, we typically about 2 hours. But
yeah. So feel free to join.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the school. We've talked a little bit about partnerships. We've talked about even some patrol stuff. I think that's probably the perfect way to segue in. We've got a guest on today who's very excited to be with us, and let's give Kayla Richard, School Resource Officer, a warm welcome here. Well, welcome, Kayla.
Thank you, guys. Glad to be here, I think.
So, it'll be good. It'll be good. So she's a little fearful that she might do too much talking, so we're gonna see what we can do. But why don't you do this? Let's just talk about your journey. Where are you from, and what brought you into law enforcement?
Okay, so I was born in Dickinson. I lived here for a year or so, and then I moved to Bismarck. So I grew up in Bismarck. From Bismarck, I went to Century High School. Kind of got interested into policing after having a really positive experience with a patrol officer named, I think his name was Tim Sass, I want to say, with the Bismarck PD. So we had called in somebody for littering or throwing some garbage out or whatever it was, and ended up meeting up with Officer Sass and just got to talking with him just about kind of whatever we wanted to talk about. It was just different. And he was very, the way he talked with us, the way he treated us like we were just normal community members, not these, teenagers calling this in. I gained a lot of respect for him, and I think because of that positive experience for law enforcement from there. And so after that, I took an intro to criminal justice class in high school, did a tour of Bismarck Police Department, did a ride along with Officer Scarlett Vetter, who's also an SRO now, and has been for a while, in Bismarck still. And so I just got introduced to the world of policing from that, and decided I wanted to go to college for criminal justice from there. And so I went to Bismarck State College and then Minot State College or University through BSc. So I have criminal justice, a bachelor's degree and an associate's degree in criminal justice from there. From there I used to dispatch right after college. I graduated and worked at North Dakota State Radio as a 911 dispatcher. I did that for about 2.5 years. And like you had mentioned just before, if you think you can't do it, you can. It was such a fun job. It was a very rewarding and fulfilling job, but also you got to be behind the scenes and do almost like detective work, but also got to have an adrenaline dump at the same time, or got to do that you're busy and it's chaotic in the telecommunications center and everybody's doing different, everyone's doing different things, or there's multiple calls coming in at one time. And it would be just busy and exciting and chaotic. And once that got done, once you were done with, and it was usually Friday or Saturday nights, of course, but you really never know when something can pop off. So after that, it was really fun. It was a good time.
For those who might not be familiar, what is state radio and what do they all cover?
So I didn't really know a lot about state radio until I applied actually and ended up working there. But state radio is, they're over at the North Dakota Department of Emergency Services. They're also at Frame Barracks, if anybody's familiar with Bismarck. So they I think they have 25 or 26 911 counties. So there's those more rural counties that contract their 911 services through North Dakota State Radio. So their 911 calls go into Bismarck at State Radio, and then we would dispatch out from there to the local police departments or sheriff's offices. And then they also dispatch for all of North Dakota Highway Patrol, Game and Fish, Parole and Probation, and parks, park rangers and Parks and Rec and stuff like that too. So, and they do you have your it was kind of a culture shock coming here to such a smaller telecommunications center, coming from state radio. So state radio is bigger. It's got the minimum back then, so this is around 2016, 2017, minimum amount around then was 5 people at the least, and 6 to 7. 6 was like your sweet spot. That was a good amount of communicators to have that night. And you would do sections of the state. So you would have Grand Forks, Devil's Lake area, you'd have Fargo, Bismarck, Williston, the Dickinson, Kildare area kind of thing. And so I was fortunate to work through the North Dakota No DAPL protest as well too. So we dispatched for Morton County and for the Highway Patrol during that. So that was a very stressful time, even behind the scenes. We obviously can't imagine what it was like for those of you guys that were there, but just even behind the scenes and watching what officers were going through at that protest was stressful in itself. And once it got kind of heated and whatnot with that, we had to be warned too about being careful with where we're saying where we're working, who we're telling personal information to, that type of thing. And it was a crazy time, but I learned a lot from that as well too. And it was once it was all said and done, it was exhausting, but it was something that I think helped formulate or help me change into somebody who really recognizes how much first responders and law enforcement, how much their day-to-day life can change just within a couple days to a couple weeks.
So as she was kind of telling her story here, I made 2 notes to myself. One of them is a quick note. Did you catch the way that she described getting to work during DAPL? It wasn't, she didn't describe it as like, oh, I had to do DAPL. And I just, it's such a simple piece that you can miss, but she talked about it as a privilege. She was privileged and she got to work it. And, so I made note of that. And I think that just kind of speaks to the character of somebody, and that's a first responder, is you don't want somebody else to have to deal with a crisis or a situation that you could potentially put your hands into. So that's one piece. So kudos to you, Kayla. The other one is, you talked about your experience in wanting to start exploring policing. And I think of this, that call for service with the littering. I mean, how simple of a situation give me the officer's name again. I forget what
Sass.
Officer Sass. I mean, how many times as a patrol officer, Kayla, have you received a call similar to that, or you go to calls that maybe somebody could look at as like, it's kind of a simple call, somewhat meaningless in the scope of a big picture thing. But here's the piece that officers sometimes don't recognize that Officer Sass did, is that every single encounter could be something like that. Yep. And it took me back to last week. Last week I'm leaving the office, passing through the lobby, and Officer Jay Claxton is sitting down with this elderly gentleman taking a call for service. And I felt compelled, and I shot her a text because it was precisely what we love to see from our patrol officers. And that was taking that little bit extra, that customer service piece that you don't see all the time, but it really is so lasting. And that's just it's such a great way to kind of to keep you in the game and to keep you to have that spot. So those were the 2 pieces that I guess I just wanted to highlight. But go on. So your time in Bismarck is not done.
Nope. So then, from there I went to Burleigh County District Court. I worked as a deputy clerk of court there for just a couple months. I think it was 6 months or so. I did the civil side of things. So there's the civil side and the criminal side in the clerk of court's office. Burleigh County is, of course, bigger. So we would do a lot of different, that's more so the behind the scenes at the court side of stuff. So making sure that paperwork is submitted correctly and that warrants are being put in correctly, or being, like if we had people with warrants coming into the court, making sure we notified the correct people, and then just, working with judges, attorneys, that type of thing. And then, of course, the public as well, too, was a big part of that. So I learned a lot about more so the process and how to read legal documents. And I never would have thought that would have come in so much handy, and it really does. So that was a huge, even today, there'll be times where I'll, if I'm reading something on ND courts, or if I call our state's attorney and ask where a case is at, or, what is needed, what documents are we at, even just being able to understand what they're talking about is really handy sometimes. And if I have people even on phone call or on calls for service, they'll show me these documents and they'll just say, I don't understand, or can you look at this and help me interpret it? So being able to help people with that too it was a small thing that I didn't think would transfer, and it really did quite a bit actually. So yeah, I did that. And then after that, went to a North Dakota Youth Correctional Center for 2.5 years and worked there in they're called cottages, the buildings are, and that was a very fun job. You at the time had to have a bachelor's degree I was a juvenile institution resident specialist. I think it's a little bit different now, but I worked at Maple Cottage and Brown Cottage. So I worked with juvenile females primarily. I did work with the males too, but primarily in the juvenile female buildings. And we would work with girls from all walks of life, a lot of girls from South Dakota, every now and then Montana or Minnesota, kind of depending. And you basically got to make sure that these kids were not only going to school, and there's a school on campus, Marmot High School, making sure that they were, doing that type of stuff, but teaching them everyday tasks that they maybe didn't learn at home. So the ages of the kids were 12 to 19. Your median age, I would say, is probably 15, 16, 17, but you did, every now and then we'd get some 13 and 12-year-olds. And so just it was teaching kids how to be not just better people, but how to live and how, and it was really, that was another one that was very rewarding, and it was like parenting, I guess, baby criminals is what I would say, but they were, it was more rehabilitative than punitive. Is it a consequence and a punishment to go to YCC? Absolutely. But,
at that age of an offender though, the goal of what you're trying to accomplish inside of YCC is totally different than the state penitentiary. Mm-hmm. And I think when people think that, they might think like, oh, you were a prison guard. It's like, well, you're way more of like a care coordinator than you are a prison guard in that setting. So
absolutely,
the offenses they commit are still pretty serious, right? What were some of the offenses that some of the kids were in there for?
So attempted murder. We've had kids. They had kids that aggravated assaults, multiple aggravated assaults, burglaries, robberies. Different types of weapon offenses, even just being in possession of weapons, possession of different drugs, as far as like amounts of drugs, but it takes a lot to get there basically. So you're thinking your C, B felonies or multiple A misdemeanors over a span of time. But I would say a lot of burglary was a big one at that time. And then just,
because the time frame now is like, we're talking about 18, 19, early 20, right?
Yeah.
And so I know where their staffing is now, and I know where their load is as far as like the caseload. What was it like back then, as far as like how full was the cottages?
So when I first started, it was usually about 12, 13 kids in Maple Cottage at the time, and that would be about average. The boys' cottages, so Hickory, there was Hickory, Brown, and Pine, and they primarily had like 15, 14 kids. Influx, of course, it would depend on if, Pine was the intake cottage, so if they were busy, they would maybe have to move kids to Brown or to Hickory Cottage and vice versa. But I would say, that 12, 13, 14 is about the normal range. And then I did see up to 16 kids in Maple Cottage at one point, and that's a lot. So you have to have, I think we had 3 staff on at night. You had to have at least 2 on during the day, and then they would have 1 on at night when they would be secure in their bedrooms. they're not able to just leave their bedroom at the night or during the middle of the night. They'd have to have 2 people there for like bathroom breaks and stuff like that. But yeah, so 16 was a lot. That's a lot of girl energy, and then and a lot of I mean, it's funny because it's all that they're still girls. They're still teenage girls. Like they still want to put their makeup on. They still want to, do that type of stuff. And it was very humbling to get to work with them and see like, oh, these kids just might not have had it good growing up, or these kids were in this space outside of here, and then inside of here they're a totally different kid, or they're really thriving, especially with the structure and just the stability that YCC would bring to them. But yeah, it was very fun.
So I'm kind of curious on something, because you're the kind of person I think that likes to track some success stories, especially you do that in law enforcement. So I'm curious to know, is there anybody, was there anybody in your time that maybe you made an investment into, like mentorship wise, that you know of now? Maybe you're not necessarily tracking them, but you just know of a success story that this person came in, they were fractured, they were broken. Now all of a sudden, like their life seems to be on a really good path.
Yeah, there's actually, I do try to keep up just in general with a couple of them. And there's definitely, I would say at least 3 to 4 that have really just kind of turned their life around, or have noticed or realized like the bigger things in life than what they were dealing with at that time. But no, there was one that was there. We would call her the goat, and I'll just leave it at that. And those that know will know. She ate grasshoppers every now and then, and pieces of paper, and really whatever she wanted. So that's how she came in. And I think she was 13 or 14 when she came in, and she was there. Generally, they didn't want kids there more than 6 months to a year. A year was like max. She was there a little bit past that. And that's okay too. It just, sometimes it takes kids a little bit longer. And so she came in, and just the look of her, I mean, the way you present yourself and the way you take care of yourself hygienically, and just doing your hair and your makeup every day, and the confidence boost that comes with that can also, I mean, just your mental health is really affected. Sure. And it looks outward as well too. So anyways, when I first met her, she had this really long hair, and didn't really care if she straightened her hair or, looked nice or whatever for the day. And she would get into, trouble and we'd call it D side or detention side. So she'd have to sit on to D side quite often, and she'd act up, and it was more so looking for just wanting that attention, whether it be positive or negative. That was okay. She didn't care at the time. But we went from somebody eating paper trying to sneak in frogs to the building and stuff like that, to the end of it. She was doing, she looked like a totally different person, because she would take care of herself. She would make sure her hair was done nicely. She would ask others to help her with her makeup and the kids do get makeup. It's like a privilege. It's not something guaranteed, but if they earned that, then they got to do that, of course. So, but she went from we were having incidents with her almost every night, every week, every month at least, and serious incidents, to one of our absolute role model kids. We didn't have to necessarily worry about her as much when it came behavior-wise. She did what's called Sabisa. She went through that, which is kind of one of their ending treatments that they need to go through. And it's a pretty in-depth process, an intense process. You don't just graduate Sabisa, and for not doing any of the work, you have to do quite a bit of work. But no, she gave it her all, and really came out a different kiddo, and more confident kiddo, and then a kiddo that realized she could trust adults. Yeah. And whatnot. So I do try to keep up with her. She's like any young adult that's gone through the things that she's gone through. She struggles every now and then, and there's definitely been some slip-ups, I know. And right now she's picking herself back up from that, and working on her sobriety. And so just for her to be able to realize that that sobriety is important and that she wants to get back to that, I think, is a lot. And she's still a young adult. I mean, she's 21 years old and able to make that choice, that positive choice. And I think that is a testament to what she learned while at YCC.
You know, I have to imagine a lot of those kids, this is their first amount of like real structure. So like when Kayla describes it in a very female fashion that Kayla would, where it talks about doing your hair and doing your makeup in the middle, it brings me back to the I'm going to forget the name of the general, but his famous
Make your bed.
Make your bed.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You know, if you start your day off with holding yourself accountable to a certain degree, you know, you really are setting yourself up for, there is a real thing in that. And, you know, whether it be how we hold our trainees to a standard, and a trainee, if they come in, Kayla, and they got dirty boots, that's something that Kayla's going to address, and she's going to say, you need to clean your boots because it matters. Like those little things, they really do matter. So I just think there's stories like that, though, they're really good wins as far as like people to understand that in that juvenile world, they really are salvageable, right? You know, and like I mean, some of those offenses that you talked about, and we're talking attempted murder, you're talking about aggravated assaults or terrorizing. I mean, those are the things that we typically see when we try to send a kid away, is like we're talking typically violent, major offenses. And it's cool to hear on the back end somebody that had seen it work and be successful.
Yes. Yep.
All right. We're done at YCC. We happen to be October of 2020.
Yes.
What happens then?
Well, then I get a phone call from Joe Ciani at the time, who was captain. And I think it was during, so it was kind of during that whole COVID stuff where we were on we didn't have any kids in the cottage at the time. It was going through some different structure changes and whatnot. And so I'm at the gym in my apartment working out, and had just been on like a meeting or Zoom call or whatever, because we are having to stay home. And I'm sitting there and I see a Dickinson number pop up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I think this is going to be either good or bad, I don't know. And so I am in this little gym in my apartment, standing there in my gym clothes, just sweating gross. And he calls in, does the job offer. And so I could not believe it. I was so excited. I got done with it, the phone call. It was probably like 2 or 3 minutes worth of a phone call, and I just had to like pinch myself. So anyways, started the whole process and came here. Luckily enough, I have family here, a lot of family here. And so I was able to stay with my dad and my stepmom for a little while here before I was able to get an apartment and some more stable housing, of course. But it was nice because I could live here and just move right in, and started shift work. I would drive in, and so even though you came to us with both education and even experience in the career field, you still went to the academy. Yes.
Right?
Yep.
How was your academy experience?
It's good.
It was good? Yeah?
No, it was fun. So I was lucky. I think it worked out super great this way. So I was here for about 3 or 4 months before I went to the academy. So I was able to have some real life experience that I was able to bring to the academy and apply to what they were teaching us. And I think that was invaluable, because I could sit there and be like, oh yeah, this is similar to this call we went to, or this is why we did it at this call, or when we'd be talking about, de-escalation and stuff like that. I was able to think of all of these different examples I had seen from my real life experience here at Dickinson PD while they're teaching it. So I felt like I almost had a little bit of like a one-up on those that weren't able to be on the road yet. So
that seems to be a really common question too that we'll get, and I know Mikey's answered this. I've heard you on the phone answering it for people. I get texted and get answered on like our recruiting line, but people are just kind of confused that you can do something like that, and to kind of do it the Kayla path, where maybe you don't have any experience, maybe you have no education in the field. You come into us, we'll start giving that to you, and then we wait for the next academy. To be honest with you, I think Mike and I would both agree that like the road that you said you liked is the route that we kind of prefer also.
Absolutely.
The 12 weeks or so, typically it's about that you could potentially get in-house here at Dickinson before going to the academy. We tend to find that the academy experience is better.
Yes.
And a lot of it's probably something that you're talking about, where you get to kind of take yourself back to those calls, or you have a working knowledge already of Century Code and how to apply that to your job. And
and actually, I'm trying to work back at all the episodes that we've done so far, and I don't know if we've ever had anybody that's actually outlined what the academy experience is like and like what y'all cover. So maybe you could be our guinea pig on that. And what are those 11 weeks? What if we send you off to the academy? What's that all about?
Oh yeah, so I really enjoyed my time at the academy. That first couple of weeks, it's just learning how to do your basic stuff. And so we had talked about making your bed every morning. So you had to do hospital corners, which I did not know what that was. Those that were in the military, the academy's a little bit easier they're used to that a little bit more. They're more comfortable with it, where we get there and the first day we're learning how to do hospital corners on our beds by a trooper. And then we're learning how to do like about face and the correct, the walking and whatnot with the flag, and which the flag folding and the raising and lowering of the flag, I think that's important to know. And it's a respectful thing to know too, and treating it as such. And then just how to shine your boots and making sure that you look appropriate and that you look put together. And because those small things matter, like we said. And luckily, I had a shift that made sure I looked put together, and made sure to teach me how to look put together. And they taught me before that how to shine my boots and how to, what a gig line is, so your belt's in the right spot. And I went to the academy and I was like, I know how to do some of this already. This is nice. But yeah, those first couple of weeks, you're just throwing a lot of information. It's a lot of classroom time at first, which I don't mind necessarily. I think it's real life experience or real life people coming in. And it's a lot of police officers, investigators, even some attorneys coming in. And it was really, I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed learning, about stuff. I mean, there was so much to learn, especially when like BCI and those different agencies would come in. And then we did the EVOC, so Emergency Vehicle Operation Control course.
There you go.
So we did that course, and so that's always a good time. That's usually like the best day, your EVOC day. Learning
not pepper spray. Right?
No, no. I'd rather be tased 20 times over and over. But no. So yeah, the EVOC was fun. Of course, the rifle day was really fun. It's a cool thing to go out and see. That's when the Highway Patrol had just kind of started building that their new rifle range out in Bismarck or out of town there. So it was fun to work there and work with different officers from across the state. And then the firearms is, it's always a good time. But OC spray was not my favorite. That I'm good for the rest of my life if I never have these again. So when they spray you at the top of your forehead, and then it drips down over your brow bone into your eyeballs. And if you are a girl and possibly enjoy doing like skincare and making sure that your skin is all nice and blah, 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 some of those skincare products might make the effect of the OC spray worse.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. So I was a hurting unit. And so what you have to do is you get OC sprayed, and then you have to pull your firearm out and tell the person, you have to tell them what to do or give commands. So it's usually like drop your firearm, drop the hatchet, whatever that is, and then give them commands to turn around, put your hands behind your back, and handcuff them. All while you're in like massive amounts of pain in your face. And if you're not smart and wear a t-shirt like I did, and it drips down onto your arms, then your arms are going to be spicy too. So I am trying to hold you're trying to hold your eyes open, and I've got my firearm out, and I'm bent over, and I am pointing my firearm at them, and I'm telling them to drop it, and they're like, drop what? And I'm like, drops whatever's in your right hand, because I couldn't get it out. And so it worked. We got it, arrested him or whatnot, and then you have to rinse it off, of course, and that's a whole other situation, trying to get it off your face, because it doesn't just come off with water and So,
I found the experience, everything they told me to do to get the burning to go away, I found it all not to be working. So I didn't know if maybe this was like the second stage of a sick joke.
Well, and it was Danny Haugen that sprays people because when he was in charge over at the LEDA, the Law Enforcement Training Academy, who's now Colonel Haugen.
Yep.
So he takes a lot of joy, sick joy.
I would not be surprised to find out that Colonel Haugen still frees up his day to go and spray.
It's the Marine in him, I'm guessing.
But everybody always talks, well, why do you guys have to do this? Why would you do that? And our answer always is like, well, so there's going to come a day that this could possibly happen. Same thing for tasing. There could become a day where this is going to happen. I can sit here in front of you and attest that the man to my right, while I was trying to secure somebody after a foot chase past the community center, and we're in the NDSU extension office. That was the second worst pepper spray experience I had post academy. That one was not very fun.
I thought you were upwind. I don't know.
And then somebody asked about tasing also, and I can attest that another sergeant in this department, he's no longer with us, but after another foot chase, accidentally tased his partner instead of tasing the individual. So I can stand here and say, yes, there's a reason. There's a reason for it. There is definitely a reason for it.
Yep.
Well, how about this? When you went to the academy, I'm curious to know, what was the female to male ratio?
It was me, Mariah, and Kayla. So I think there was 5 of us females, I want to say. And then 18 males.
Okay, so it was you guys had a smaller academy class.
It wasn't huge. It wasn't big. We actually were in the smaller classroom too.
Okay.
And then the Highway Patrol was finishing up their academy site. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
because when I had looked at it, and we had Jenna Clausen on here a couple of months ago, and she had talked a lot about her experience, as a woman in law enforcement and kind of some of the challenges that she's faced and things like that. And I'm guessing, when I look at what Dickinson's doing here, and we currently have 8 females, sworn officers, and that's out of our 44 that we have right now, 8 of them. And that number is higher than the national average, higher than the state average. And I just kind of, what do you think? What skill sets do you think that the female brings, maybe that sometimes get lost or sometimes get we even maybe don't even hold them to the same, I don't know, standard as far as like value, if you get where I'm trying to track you.
Yeah, so I would say the way the female brain works is, it's just different. The way we process information, sometimes this is a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But when you have a female and a male on a call, especially domestic violence calls or calls with juveniles, could be any type of call, really. The way that we are able to think of a situation, process it, and then apply how we think it could be handled or how we could interact with someone might be different than a male's brain way of thinking about it. So, and inherently, we are more likely to be okay with showing empathy and sympathy for people. And sometimes I think too, the way just our presence can really be calming for some people. Sometimes it can be the other way around. But I think between that and then just especially when we have new recruits that are male, and even younger, I would say, when they are able to see females, especially females who have been here for a while, see that we hold value and that the department in turn hires the amount of women that we do, and that the department values us as women, I think that helps the new hires see just the quality side of things. So when they respond to a call, they might, I don't know if it's just a way that they act differently with women sometimes, but it all envelopes together, and that I think just the way that our mind works is so different. Like, and sometimes we're all over the place. A lot of the times we're all over the place, but the critical thinking aspect too can be just incredible. Like with Detective Tiffany and Detective Oki, the way that their minds work when it comes to the investigations is absolutely crazy and insane to me. and the way that they're able to deduce a case and find the evidence that they find is, and it's not necessarily a gender thing, but the way that their mind works, I think, assists in that.
So I think you're onto something. And, one thing I think that I have recognized is you called it critical thinking, and you talked a little bit about empathy, and I would totally agree with those things. But the other piece I would talk about would be patience. Mm-hmm. I feel like our female officers tend to have a little bit longer of a fuse and a little bit more, you call it empathy if you want to, but to where a male officer is almost like, all right, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I'm going to move on to the next thing. And just that little bit of attention. I mean, I mentioned the Jay Claxton situation where she's just talking to somebody and just making that person's problem her problem and showing them that they care. Same thing when it comes to, that's exactly what's happening when you're listening to CNT. And some of our best negotiators that we have, one of them here, are the people that are just, you don't have an agenda. You're not necessarily trying to, solve their problem right then and there. And I kind of feel like that's a little bit of what, it's a stereotypical thing, but sometimes guys are looking for, like, I'm looking for the fix, and if I can't find it, then we got to solve this thing right now.
True.
Negatives. How about negatives? What and I prepped this one with a question that I hopefully you're going to walk us into, but I'm looking to see do you think that there's anything that a woman in law enforcement, do you feel like there's still this bit like you have to prove yourself, you have to show yourself, even though you've earned the right, you have the exact same qualities and capabilities and trainings, do you still carry that?
I would say yes, just from my experience here. So I've been here for 5 years, and I do feel like more so even I would say your first 2 years, which is as a new officer in general, you feel like you have to prove yourself. But I think it's looked upon as though we don't want to get into those scuffles or the fights, or we're afraid of going hands-on or something like that. And we're afraid of getting dirty or having to, fisticuffs type of thing. And I think that even to this day, there'll be incidents that happen that people will be impressed that I or another female stepped in during a fight or during an incident where we are the smaller person of the however many. And I think just in general, I do think it's still a thing. It depends on your department, and it depends on honestly where you live, I think too can be a big factor. Luckily here though, we do have a lot of female officers here. When I started, it was not nearly as many, and it was exciting. It's been exciting to see that we're pretty consistently hiring females. So,
So you knew I think you can feel where I was trying to take you on that one. And I would probably agree with you. There's still probably that piece inside of policing to where it's easy to say that as an answer. And I think it goes back to patience. Like a female is going to exercise maybe a little bit more time and attention. Then there's going to be certain situations maybe where you don't have those.
Yes.
And your current assignment is you are stationed in the high school as our school resource officer. This year is not your first year, but this year it's had some challenges to it. That high school redesign has created a lot of challenges just with the way that kids had to come into the school, and how things are just how disruptive the school is in general with all of the construction going on. But you got a chance to prove anybody who maybe had that belief or had that thought, you had a chance to prove yourself, and I think you did it in spades. And I even got to walk into the patrol room, and there was a patrol officer who happens to be a former collegiate wrestler, and he was giving you props, giving you kudos for how Kayla, just without even a shred of hesitation. Jumped in and got involved into, in my time, probably the worst fight that I had seen inside of the walls of the high school. And just kind of walk us through that interaction or that day for you.
So I think that comes with too, I am very protective of people, and I think that's a really important skill that we have that we don't realize all the time about us as law enforcement and as first responders. And so, and to piggyback off of that too, I also really enjoy, and I learned this from YCC, I really enjoy developing rapport with the kids that maybe have a not so awesome experience with law enforcement, or maybe don't have a super great home life, or I know that just maybe need a little extra attention, a little extra positivity in their day. And so I knew I had really good rapport with a lot of those kids, so much so that I was more so disappointed in them than mad at them for the incident itself. But
isn't that a dad phrase?
I know. I was. I told them too. I told them all. I was very disappointed. And I think that because of the relationship that I had with all of the kids, pretty much, I mean, I knew I had a good rapport with all of them for the most part. I mean, one of them, her and I struggled relationship-wise, but we were getting there. It's kind of like cracking that outer shell to get into the good stuff. And so her and I kind of were trying to rekindle this, positive relationship throughout the beginning of the school year. And same with one of the other juveniles. He had not been at this school prior, and so I just wanted to be there and say, hey, this is maybe how you have dealt with law enforcement in the past. It's going to be different here at the school, hopefully. And it'll be in a positive way, not so much a response way. But anyways, so with that, when the incident did happen, I was somewhat able to control some of the situation because I knew them so well, to an extent. But when I was walking out with one of the individuals, they told me that this would be, I guess, one of those female things too. I wonder if I was like a big buff guy, if they would have said this to me. But I was escorting the individual out, and they said, I'm stronger than you and I'm faster than you, but I'm trying to be respectful right now. It's just like, I was exhausted at that point, and I'm like, of all times. but it was a sad, bittersweet, I guess you could say. Like, I'm glad that you were able to recognize within yourself as a juvenile and as a kid that just went through what he had went through, that you were actively trying to be respectful to law enforcement in that moment. And so it was more fulfilling than you would think it would have been, I guess.
So when you talked a little bit about your relationships that you had with these juveniles, you and I talked the next day, I want to say, maybe the day after, and you had told me that you knew something was going to happen, and you had put yourself in a position, not necessarily it's impossible to stop something like what we saw from taking place, but because of your intuition and what you had already kind of foreseen to take place, you were basically immediately on top of the situation and trying to resolve it. And I think that goes to, again, police intuition and just the relationships that you're able to build. Yeah. So I do think that there was a lot of credit that should be given into that sometimes could just go by the wayside. Well, she was there doing her job. Well, yes, but at the same time, without you knowing those players and kind of having an idea of like where that thing was percolating at, I think it potentially would have been messier.
Yeah, well, thanks.
So I got a question for you. Since that incident, how has your rapport been amongst the students at the high school? Has it changed at all, altered?
It directly, so the next day, I was worried that they were going to think because of course the rumor mill starts, and Officer Richard was body slammed, and I was like, I was not body slammed. But, and then I'm thinking, it's probably going to be like, other than the rumors of what happened, it's just going to be business as usual. I think I had 10 or so kids, maybe more, come up and say that they were glad I was okay, and that they asked if I was okay, or they were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here today. And I said, well, of course, it's just got to be here. Someone's got to be here. And so that was a really cool thing to see, I guess, just directly after, and those next couple of days after. was the kids just coming up to me, even kids I didn't really know that well, would come up to me and say that they were glad I was okay, or they would come up and give me a hug. And honestly, one of the involvees, I guess, not directly, but was there, she came up and she could have been mad at me for, citing who I did and whatever. And, but she came up and gave me a hug. And so I was really impressed and touched by that, I think, more than anything. But I would say a lot of, and we have hearings and whatnot afterwards as far as the school side of things go. And so I saw the majority of those kids afterwards. And I did get some apologies and some I didn't, and that's okay. But I would say overall, the general feeling, I guess, towards myself, or that I feel when I'm there, is that they realize I'm going to keep them protected, or I'm going to keep them safe. And they know that I'm going to show up and not just leave because something crappy happened one day, which I think comes back to ICC, is because I'm a solid figure and I'm a stable figure and I provide that stability and feeling of being safe. And so when they were able to see that those next couple of days, and that I continued, we're pushing on, we're still going to be here. Same with the, administration and whatnot. I hope anyways that they were able to feel some comfort in that, I guess. And
I think that's a big takeaway for parents that have kids in the school system for two things. First and foremost, that we have kids in our school system now that are understanding that level of empathy for others, and even adults and stuff like that. I don't know, when I was growing up, if my cohort would probably have had that level of maturity or that level of recognition, and so much so that yesterday when we were me and Jarrett were shooting the video for the middle school stuff, all the kids that were coming up to them, and just the level of rapport that our entire SRO staff has been investing into our school district, it's paying off dividends, and you can see just the level of maturity and the kindness that are exhibited. So for those parents out there that are just getting their information from the dumpster fire that is What's Up Dickinson, about what's going on in the schools and how chaotic it is. I don't know. I see a different picture of our youth, the level of maturity of our youth in our school system. So that's number one. And the second part is just that investment part that you guys have been doing and investing in the youth. The parents should feel comfortable and knowing that they're sending their kids off to school and that they're being looked after very well by our school system and our SRO staff. Yeah.
That's, and you literally took the words from me. That's what I was going to say, is that rapport and that what Kayla has at the end of their time, it didn't just start. You know what I mean? Like, I think we do such a good job when Kayla would talk about her partner SROs between Jarrett and the foundation that he builds with those kids at the middle school, and then go earlier. And now you think about what Abby's doing in the elementary schools, the teaching at the CTE building. Like, it's a real phenomenon that's going on where, growing up, I didn't possess any of those skills, but it's just like understanding. Ultimately, we're all humans, and I think that's what we try to portray. That as we continue to try to put the human behind the badge. Yeah. And I think our SROs do such a good job of that. And we had that conversation amongst administrators after your fight situation where we were talking about that. And we're like, well, do we make any kind of policy changes? Do we do anything? And ultimately, I think Mike and I were the two in agreement that we're hand selecting these individuals. Sure, there's some amount of like they want to be in the SRO world. But the other piece is it's somebody who it really has an appetite to do exactly what's being done right now, which is being a mentor. You may not even think of yourself as a mentor when it's coming to these things, but like that ultimately is what's happening, is you're providing that stable figure, you're providing it. And the school system, I think they do a fantastic job doing that too. Like our partnerships that we have with the Dickinson Public Schools, I don't know that I could say it's ever been stronger than where we are right now currently this year with the administration, between the working staff, and between kind of what our SROs bring into the public schools. go through this. I'm curious to know, give me, so far in the past 5 years, because we just hit 5 years last month, give me, what is the career highlight moment so far in this first chunk of a handful of years? What is Kayla, if you think about it and you reflect back, what is this moment that you're like, you know what, I know I'm doing the right thing because I had, X to go back to and to kind of realign me into why I'm doing this?
Ooh, so there's just been so many, but no, I'm trying to think of like a specific one, because, and I think too, like with being in law enforcement and being on patrol, especially, those years like fly by when you're on patrol, and you almost have to remind yourself of why you do it sometimes. But I would say there was an incident that occurred, this is when I was on patrol still, where it was just a super busy night. We had a very serious incident with a gentleman trying to strike the mother of his kids in a parking lot, and the two little kids were in the back seat of the vehicle, and he was under the influence or whatever have you, and we got into a short pursuit with him, end up arresting him after some tussling and whatnot, get the kiddos into a safe place. Mind you, like one's in a little baby carrier and one's a toddler. So anyways, we get done with that. Night's still young. We still got a lot of time left in the game. And from there, I get a call to go to a gas station where there were some kiddos, two little girls and their mom, and they're not from around here, so they were just stopping for gas at this gas station, and they were with the mom's significant other at the time, and they were from Arkansas or somewhere down south, and they had been driving for some time, and behaviors were escalating and some concerning stuff was starting to happen and escalate, and the mom started getting worried about her safety and the safety of her children. So she walked into the gas station with the kids and said to the gas station attendant that she needed help, and that she was afraid to leave with the person that she was with. So the gas station attendant, who did a phenomenal job and I think is a hero herself, and just the foresight and the thought behind this was incredible. She took the mom and two daughters, put them in like a back closet that she can lock, and locked them in there, and called police. And so, because the mom didn't have a phone, and it was, and like I said, not from around here, and had no one, of course, that they would have known or anything. So just a perfect storm. But this gas station attendant called law enforcement and said, we need to get somebody over here right now. This is what's going on. And I show up. And so anytime you go into a situation like that where there's probably some domestic issues and whatnot going on, you get a little not nervous, but you're more situationally aware. You're more aware of what you're going into, and that it could amp up at any time. And so anyways, I'm able to get there, talk to the kids and to the mom, and we come up with a plan to get them to safety. And while they are back in that little area of the gas station, the gentleman is of course looking for them, and I say, nope, you're able to leave, but they're gonna stay here for the night. But you can drive on where you need to. And so eventually, after some time, he left, and I was able to get them, the mom and the two little girls, to a safe place. And the two little girls, while I was walking out, I think I was holding, I don't know if we were holding hands or what, and they were just little, but I get them in my car, and one little girl's just like, I want to be a police officer when I grow up. And I'm like, I don't know, man. It's been a night, girl, but no. Long story short, get them to the safe place, get them help, get them somewhere warm to stay and whatnot, and in communication and relationship with somebody or somewhere that is able to help them out, not just that night, but getting back to Arkansas, basically. So anyways, I think after that, I had an adrenaline dump, and I also realized when I went home that I was able to help the 2 little girls and this mom who had no one else at that time that they knew about, and I was able to protect them. And I think that was just a super fulfilling, rewarding moment and I still think about those girls and I remember their names. And so yeah, I think that was definitely one of those moments. There's been quite a few, I would say.
You know, I think what makes that story special is as you're sitting there and you're listening to it, kind of similar to the story that brought you into law enforcement. It's just like, maybe you're waiting for and then this guy attacks Kayla and then Kayla comes to the rescue or something along those lines. But it's just taking a moment to just understand what your mission is. And you came into this career field with a mission to do right by Officer Sass. So there you go. I remember it.
Sergeant Sass. He's not there
and
anymore,
it's just understanding that that little bit of time that you can take and just making an impact on. And I just think kudos to you, Kayla. You've been doing such a good job for us. I absolutely believe that we have you in the right position right now. I mean, the relationships what you're doing inside of our high school has just been fantastic. I loved hearing some of the feedback that you had for improvements when it comes to school safety. That really shows. It really shows to me. This is somebody who takes this career field seriously. Not necessarily somebody who's just coming to work and, sure, it could be a job. You're putting your 40 hours, whatever, in a week, and then you're going home. But it's somebody who's making an investment into, this is beyond that. This is a profession. And if I'm going to be a professional in this profession, I'm going to take things seriously. And you might not always get your way when it comes to, whatever you're recommending or wherever you're doing things. But no, I just wanted to echo that and say that, like I said, I think you're doing a fantastic job.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
If you were to, we're getting towards the end here, and I know that there's one question we always like saving for the end, but even before that one is kind of a like one, because I'm hoping that we get a lot of likes and shares on your guys' SRO Facebook page to this particular podcast. So I'm hoping a lot of your students will be tuning into this and listening to you here and all that stuff. So you have hopefully a big captive audience of them listening right now. So if you were to give them a piece of lifely advice, like this is the valedictorian speech at their ceremony, what would be, of all your experiences that you've had in life so far, what would you impart on to them for some life advice?
Do your hair and makeup.
Yeah. Make your bed. No, I don't make my bed. But no, I would say just understanding that whatever you're going through right now, especially that high school age kids, middle school age kids even, but whenever it seems like something's maybe not going super great or you're not feeling that great about yourself or your work or your home life or whatever it is, that there's always going to be better days ahead, and to make sure you remind yourself that there's going to be better days and that this is maybe just a bump in the road, or maybe it's not even a bump in the road. Like, eventually everything works out the way that you want it to, and for the most part, and if you make the correct choices in life, and starting in high school, which is, I had to start making some better life choices in high school when I was younger, and because I had the ability to see that, and I think too, I mean, I wanted to be a police officer 15, 16 years old, so I had to tell myself, like, you need to make better life choices, or you need to make responsible choices for yourself. Being able to have that foresight and thought behind that, I think, is part of the reason I am successful, I guess you want to say, and that I am where I'm at today. And then also just, if people think you can't do it, you can. That's probably my favorite part too about being a female in law enforcement, is sometimes not here, but at previous jobs I've been at, or even previous people that I've known and whatnot, been friends with, have said, "Oh, I can't see you being a police officer," anything like that, or I could see you being a meter maid. That was my favorite. I was like, okay, well, but I think just knowing that if you want to do it, you can do it, as long as you put your mind to it, I think you can do pretty much anything you want to do. And sometimes you have to remind yourself of that day 2 of the academy because you're running in 0-degree weather. And you're asking yourself why you're doing this at 5 a.m. But no, sticking to your goals and knowing that everything will work out if you continue setting those goals for yourself and holding yourself accountable.
Yeah, I really liked, her message when it came to having some foresight and, just having a plan put in place for you. I think that there's so many, young kids that they lack that. They lack, maybe they don't even know what they're doing later in that day, but you'll see the kids that it's different in them when they have true sense of purpose, and they're really directed towards those things. And it's easy for us to, we can highlight whether it be, kids in the CTE building that they're really driven towards this is their goal, this is their end game. Or you look at athletes, for example, but there's so many kids where it's just the difference and the beauty of what DPS does here, where you're almost cultivating the young brains early into whatever career field that they ultimately want to go into. And I just think that so much good is happening with that as far as steering them into the right direction early on. Well, Kayla, it was great having you. We do have one more section of stuff we're going to have you answer.
Oh boy.
And, but yeah, kudos to you, Kayla. Congratulations on the 5 years of service last month.
Thank you.
And without further ado, jump into some speed cuffing here.
There you go. So this would be, what it's all about?
No,
so it's going to be 30 seconds, right? 30 seconds when the music starts. We're just going to be asking you some random question, maybe some trivia intermixed in there. Just give it as best guess as you can. If you can't come up with anything, just say pass, and we'll see how you do. All right?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Here we go.
What's the best restaurant in Dickinson?
Ooh, Grub Tub.
Favorite professional sports team?
Broncos.
What are the 3 cottages at YCC called?
Maple, brown, hickory, pine.
Layup.
What Gen Z term is used to emphasize being honest?
Cap.
There you go. What is the officer's name from the Hangover movie that lets Alan tase him?
I don't know.
Officer Franklin. How about this one? Who was the DHS track coach from 85 to 2003 who racked up multiple state titles? Do you know that one by chance?
Oh, no.
It's a tough one.
Mikey threw a curveball. That'd be a Jack Carlson.
Oh, yeah. No.
It's up on the wall there somewhere.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Well, Kayla, thanks for coming on. Thank you for taking some time on this Friday afternoon to come and do this for us. So
This is good. You make us proud.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Keep doing
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Thank you.